doing, everyone? Is that visible?
That is very visible. You're coming through loud and clear. I'm now going to turn my video off and go on mute. I'd just like to let everyone know that we'll do a Q&A at the end of this. It's much easier to handle with these sorts of Zoom lectures to just do Q&A at the end.
Okay, that sounds like a good plan. And I plan to speak for sort of 20 minutes, if that's okay, to introduce the LR Foundation and the Heritage and Education Centre, to give you an idea of how it's organised and what role we seek to play. And then I'm happy to take any questions after that. But I think if that's fits with everyone's expectations, I think I've probably got enough material to cover that. I am excited to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm a little bit of a novice to the sector, to be honest, so I may be teaching grandmothers to suck eggs or being the obvious, but I'm going to go in anyway and hope you manage to extract some value from what I'm going to say, how I'm going to present. So who am I, and how am I allowed to present to you today? Well, I am the director of the Heritage and Education Centre at the Lloyd's Register Foundation. I've been in post about 18 months. Before that, I was working at the Victoria and Albert Museum in South Kensington, where I was the director of digital, commercial and exhibitions. I was recruited, and I was excited to take this role because I had 7 fantastic years at the V&A, where we'd put on some of these extraordinary exhibitions. I worked very closely with Pink Floyd to put the Pink Floyd exhibition on. We put on a huge, I signed off with a huge exhibition about Christian Dior, which was the biggest exhibition that the V&A had ever put on. That I was fed up at the end of working with pots and frocks, which is what the V&A really was, and being in the world of sort of middle class subsidy, and I wanted to take a job that was closer to the action, where actually I could use what I knew about heritage, but also apply it to the problems that we face and that my children will face in the future. I was also fascinated by the world of philanthropy and grant making, or not. This isn't necessarily philanthropy, but the world of grant making, because at the V&A, I'd sort of got a strong sense that we can do this a lot better. We can help our those can help those who need a lot better, with better dialogue and better understanding. So this job was a fantastic opportunity for me to do that, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we've done and how we're set up as we go along. But I'll start perhaps with a little bit of an introduction. I know a lot of you will know Lloyd's Register, and essentially, but I'll tell you a little bit about the Lloyd's Register Foundation and how that came into being. We're 10 years old. We were 10 years old last year, so we're a very young foundation. And the Lloyd's Register itself was set up for years as what's called an Industrial Provident Society, or was called an Industrial Provident Society, which is, without going into too much detail, I'm not sure I know all the detail of it. Essentially, it's a sort of hybrid corporate structure that's half charity, half business, and was, enjoyed very good tax arrangements in the UK. And as I say, 10, 12 years ago, the government said, well, enough of that. We're simplifying things. Let's going to abolish industrial provident societies, and you have to decide whether you're going to be a charity or a business. Now, the trustees and the leadership of the Lloyd's Register at the time said, well, we'll decide, we'll make that decision, thank you very much. And so they got some expensive lawyers in a room, and they decided that actually the best thing for them would be to try to reconstruct the structure that had served Lloyd's so well, because Lloyd's was founded as a social purpose organization back in the day, And they wanted to keep that social purpose at the heart of what they did. It's because a lot of people joined Lloyd's because of its social purpose. It wasn't a sort of owned by a venture capital firm or private shareholders. It had at its heart a desire to make the world a safer place. So in order to preserve that culture, they gave all the equity in Lloyd's Register to a foundation and £200 million, and said, right, you own us. We will continue to do what we do, and what we would normally distribute in tax, we will give to you at the foundation so that you can distribute that into the world on our behalf. And we have a very clear mission. It's about improving technical standards in engineering, and making the world safer as a result of improved technical standards, and educating people about the importance of technical standards in infrastructure. It's a sort of very tight brief, but all these things are, kind of improved by interpretation and how you bring that into the world. But so technical standards and education are the two drivers for what the foundation does. And we have been going 10 years, and effectively, if you put it in financial terms, roughly speaking, I mean, it depends on the stock market performance and inflation and that sort of thing, but roughly speaking, we have about 30 to 40 million pounds a year to distribute, which puts us in the UK terms as top division. No one's as big as Wellcome. The Wellcome Foundation is by far the biggest, but we are, the next level down. There are a number of foundations, and we are, in that next level down. So you might have heard of Esme Fairbairn or Paul Hamlin or whatever these other ones. And we're roughly the same size in terms of distributable resources and how we distribute them. The foundation's mission itself is, we are, look for engineering solutions across the world, ways in which we can help engineering a safer world. We work, it's quite a crowded field. They've got the Royal Academy of Engineering, the Institute of Engineering and Technology. We've got you guys. We've got a lot of people in the space, and we try to exchange and work with them as much as we can. We employ 40 people, 35, 40 people, and we're set up as programs teams, so people who look out for grant making opportunities. We've got an evidence and insight team who run a particularly successful program called the World Risk Poll, where we try to establish data about the public's understanding of risk in their lives, across territories, which we run and try to inform and better inform the public about risk and how to manage it, and help policymakers understand how their constituents feel about the risks in their lives. And we have a strategic communications team trying to build our reputation. And we have the Heritage and Education Centre, which is the centre that I run. So that is gets me through the door here today. So this gives you this slide tells you a little bit about how it works, and explains what I've just said in terms of engineering a safer world. The interesting one of the things to talk about is in terms of the corporate structure, is that both the Lloyd's Register and the Lloyd's Register Foundation share a chairman. But in order to preserve the foundation's charitable status, we have to be seen as independent from the Lloyd's Register. And although we seek to work in tandem with the group, we also have to have divergent aims and divergent structures, and we can't just be told what to do by Nick Brown when he needs some additional research done or anything like that. We have to have a clear water between us, although we do try to cooperate. So that's the line that we walk all the time, which is quite complicated, actually. So we are obviously, all of us at the foundation are aware that behind and above, around everything that we do, there is climate change, and we recognise that the ocean is the climate. And so there's no, unless we look after the ocean, we cannot possibly solve the climate crisis. And that is that runs through everything that we do. However, we're not an environmental charity. We don't fund direct, sort of clean up the ocean type work. We do fund the impact of climate on people, on safety, because safety comes first for us. And so where infrastructure needs to be changed or rendered safe in order to look after the people in the light of climate change and population movements and all the mega trends, we can do that, but we don't directly fund environmental charities. Plenty of people who do, and we work alongside many of those people, but part of the game that we play is, what can we do and what can't we do? What's unique to us? Where can we make a unique difference? And that right now is in where maritime and safety intersect, and that's where we try to make our difference. So let's go on to talk about heritage, which is what I'm here to talk about, because that's part of the Lloyd's Register Foundation. And Lloyd's is unique, really, in as much as it's held on to its story. It's got a very long and proud history, starting in 1760, of essentially asking and answering the same question: is this ship safe to go to sea? If not, why not? And we're lucky enough to have accumulated records along the way that tell that story, and that tell the story of the evolving maritime industry in which Britain played such a central role, as well as a really interesting corporate history where lots of very colourful and interesting individuals came through. And also we have a great building in the Coal Cup building, which tells our story, has our story kind of imprinted on it. So there is a massive heritage here, and we're a heritage asset that needs managing and developing. And it's at the V&A, there's a thing that happened where in the 1920s, museums all over the world had plaster cast models of or in the late 19th century, right through to the 1920s, have plaster-cast models of the great buildings, of sculptures and frontispieces and graves and, you know, very ornate things, because mass travel hadn't really happened, and so it was, you know, the people weren't allowed to go and see, you know, were never going to get to go and see Michelangelo's David. So the Victorians, being, you know, philanthropic people at their heart, said, well, let's just give them a plaster cast of it, a really good plaster cast of it, or so that they can go and see it as close as they can to go and see, you know, an equivalent of it. And so museums all over the world had these plaster casts. And then the 1920s, as travel started to take a hold, and that there was a kind of cult of the authentic, which largely was driven by John Ruskin in the end of the 19th century, museums destroyed these plaster casts. They thought those terrible things. Why do we want them? Let's put them in the bin. So they threw them all in the bin, except the V&A, who said, no, we won't do that, because they had a huge part of their building was designed to host one of the best collections of these plaster casts. The V&A said, no, we'll hang on to them, despite the fact it was totally unfashionable to do so. And as a result, today, the cast courts at the V&A are by far the most popular gallery in the place. It's just an amazing, mad space where you see these plaster casts of great world works of art, including kind of Trajan's column and that sort of thing. And in fact, the Trajan's column you see at the V&A cast court is much better than the Trajan's column you see in Rome, because it's not covered with pollution. And Lloyd's Register did a similar thing, where a lot of the other class societies threw away their records and just didn't really think they were interesting. But we hung on to ours because they were seen to be too good to. And it was actually largely the work of one woman, Barbara Jones, who still works on my team, who went around sort of squirreling these things away when people would throw them. I didn't know what to do. So he literally rescued some things from skips and bins and, you know, dusty old cupboards. And so actually we've held on to our records, and they form the heart of what we do. And we'll talk about those again more in a minute. And at the heart of what we do is an archive of ship plans and survey reports that go back 250 years that we can share with the world now digitally. So, but we have to, so I'll just change my slide. So what exactly it is it that we do, and how am I going to explain it? So here's a very corporate slide, and then I'll use it to hang the story off. So we have three basic functions at the Heritage and Education Centre. We're the keepers of the LR story, which is, as I've described. We have an archive. We have a team of expert people who manage that archive, and we try to bring it alive. So we engage historians and writers and blog, you know, and videos. We do videos of ship models, you know, that to animate them so that you can see that we have a podcast called the Mariner's Mirror podcast that we fund. We have a team of a historian couple in Exeter whose job it is to mine the archive and tell stories based on the ships that they discover there. So we keep the LR story and we keep it alive. We try to keep it relevant because LR is alive and relevant and functioning. And so we want to continually remind people of all the stuff that we've learned and all the stuff that we have, and to keep the history as a living, breathing thing of the organization. And our website, you know, is constantly updated and full of new content, but above all, it's full of this amazing archive that we hold. And we're excited today because we're about to embark on digitizing the microfilm and microfiche collection. We've digitized the whole paper collection, which took a huge amount of time. But basically, the paper records run out in about 1980, and then everything moved on to microfilm and microfiche. That's decaying now quite fast, so that's not a long-term asset. So we're going to digitize that, and that'll bring the archive right up to date to about 2000, when the material, after which the material starts to get a bit commercially sensitive. But that's going to mean that we have a truly modern archive that includes gas, liquid gas ships and oil tankers and container ships, much more than it does before. But that's not enough. In the middle, then we talk about learning from the past. So we also fund projects that say, let's try to apply the learnings from the past to today's problems. So one of the big problems that the foundation is trying to tackle is the decarbonisation of shipping. Now, the shipping industry has been through 3 energy transitions in the past, and we should be able to learn and provide narrative and story and collateral to the debate from those energy transitions in all across the world, to help inform those people who are making decisions today, so they don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So we've organized a series of grants that go out to a global network of maritime museums to say, tell us what you can tell us about what your museum and your collection can tell us about energy transition. How did it happen? What changes were needed? What technologies were used? Who were the people involved? So that we can create collateral and stories that today's policymakers can draw, because they've recognized that they're not working in a void, that people have done this before, and that they can learn from those mistakes. We've got another grant going in the Imperial War Museum in the UK, where we're funding a curator to research how technology transferred from military to civilian use. It seems, wartime is an incredible crucible for innovation, particularly in the engineering field. So if you think about today's chemotherapy, a lot of those understanding of chemotherapy came from mustard gas, believe it or not. There's a straight line that you can draw between the technology that was used for mustard gas to the technology that's used today for technology. Or if you look at transporting tanks over water, which had never really been done at scale before D-Day, and the technology required to do that massively advanced the ferry design and created the roll-on, roll-off ferries that are so ubiquitous today. So if we can, and the theory of change, which is what foundation people talk about, is that if you can accelerate the arrival of new technologies into the world today, and new safety technologies, then you'll save thousands of lives. And if you can describe the processes and the stories of how that happened, then maybe these technologies will arrive a year or two ahead of schedule. And the final element of our work is we call global insight, local knowledge, where we support global networks of people who are fighting to who are engaged in heritage work, and trying to make keep the heritage relevant to today's stories. So there's a lot of interesting work. We fund the UN Ocean Decade Cultural Heritage Framework, which is a global coalition of people working in the cultural heritage field in terms of the ocean. We're funding today, we're working with the University of the Arctic. We're about to start working with the University of the Arctic, which is a federation of universities, obviously who border the Arctic region. And we're going to fund a chair to look at the safety issues that are raised by the melting of the ice caps and the opening of the Northwest Passage, and see a sudden arrival of these huge ships into the lives of the indigenous people, and how those lifestyles can be preserved and those cultures can be preserved in the light of this massive change. We're also funding, this is my personal favorite at the moment, is something called the Ocean Foundation, which is a global network of ocean professionals to talk about underwater cultural heritage and potentially polluting wrecks. All over the world there are these wrecks with at the bottom of the ocean with fuel that's starting to leak, and some of them even have bombs and munitions in them. And we were going to use the Lloyd's Register archive to identify where these wrecks are and the design of the ships, and then to try to inform a global movement about what do we do with these effectively ticking environmental bombs that we need to engage with, and that could go off at any time, or could pollute at any time. So that's an example of global insight and local knowledge, and how we fund those things. So let's talk a little bit about the asset. We've got material from, we've got a huge library. We talk about the archive, but we've also got a 50,000 volume library that relates to the history of maritime safety, not just register books, but all things that relate to that. We've got this archive, over 1 million pages have been digitized and now available online. We've got, as you can see here, obviously the books, we've got journals, we've got casualty returns and rec books, we've got community minutes and business archives, and we've got 1,000 boxes. Well, we've got 3,000 boxes. We don't even know what's in the boxes. So we've just got two people, Zach and Ellie, whose job it is to go up and down these things, doing an inventory of what's in the boxes, so that we can start to control and understand exactly what we've got. The jewel in the crown is, though, this ship plan and survey report archive, which presents, these beautiful plans and survey reports about how they were used. And this is very, very popular among marine historians, people trying to work out ship designers, people that are interested in maritime history, and in it can and by looking closely at it, you can map key design changes in response to safety, new and emerging safety challenges around the world, and new emerging technologies. So refrigerating ships from New Zealand, bringing meat from New Zealand here. How do you keep those safe? How do you different energy sources coming through in terms of ship design? How did Lloyd's make sure that those were safe? So it's a fascinating archive, and in the way of archives, you can never quite predict who's going to use it. So we've had people coming into our archive who are not interested in ships at all, but interested in handwriting. So they've used the handwriting of the surveyors, which comes on all the to understand the evolution of handwriting over this time. So it's a wonderful kind of creative process, and digitally now we can reach a global audience through using this. We've got as part of our toolkit, we've got what called the robo scanner. So we've bought a machine that literally turns the pages of books and automatically does a digital scan of them, and then does an optical character recognition of the contents of those books. So it makes them instantly, once you've got the scan, makes them instantly searchable by keyword, and then we upload those onto the archives.org website so that they are available to a global audience. So we're really making a contribution. I'm doing my usual thing about talking too much, and I'm not looking at the time, so I'm going to go a bit quicker. So we've talked about learning from the past. So this is again one of the drivers. One of the things that interests me personally about this is, how does safety happen? Let's try to understand, how does safety happen? Is it through legislation? Is it through innovation? Is it through reaction to disasters? And what are the dynamics of how safety innovation has happened in the past, and what are the drivers of that? And let's try to look at one of the research projects we're kicking off, is to look at, how does the impact on actual safety of different technical innovations or different pieces of legislation, because it's not entirely clear what the most effective way to push the boundaries of safety forward are, and I think if we can develop a model based on historical fact for how that happens, then I think it will help us understand how the incredible challenges that we face going forward as in a massively changing environment, where we're going to have accelerated technological change going forward in a way that we've never seen before. And the more we can understand the safety system and all the various factors in play there, the better policy will be written going forward that will allow people in the ocean economy to stay safe going forward. One of the challenges, this is, I like this slide, because it tells you why it's important, because engineering organizations are kind of quite hostile to heritage and arts. There's a sort of tension there. It's very much one of those two worlds problems, where you have the world of culture and the world of science, and the two things don't really intersect. But the more I talk to the people who are in decarbonization, and looking for, and who are the agents of change, so that we got the safety tech accelerator people and the decarbonization people, the more they recognize that they need stories to tell, that they need to be fed with narrative and examples, in order to stimulate thought and to stimulate discussion. And that's really our role, is to bring out all the stories that are hidden in these collections all over the world to help make those relevant to today. In particular, I'm very interested in, we'll talk about this. Is changing perceptions of the ocean, to away from the industrial. And I'm not alone in this. There's the whole movement about this, about changing our perception of the ocean as something to be crossed, something to be conquered, and a resource to be mined, towards back to something that we have to live in partnership with, something that we depend on, because it is, as I say, it is the source of, it is the source of the stability of our climate. It's the source of so much food and so many resources. We understand it so little. And that people used to live in harmony with the oceans, and indigenous people, who talk to the people in North America, or if you talk to people from indigenous communities all over the world, have a totally different relationship with the sea, which has been lost through the Industrial Revolution. And we need to reclaim that and hear those voices again, if we're going to live sustainably with the ocean going forward. And part of our job is to enable that process. But we are where we are. So we have a rigorous process. We are about data. We are about engaging with partners. We're about understanding who our people are, and bringing a network of people together who are involved in heritage organizations around the world. It's not just museums, it's NGOs. There's a massive community of people who are involved in cultural heritage as it relates to the ocean, and we want to play our part in that as an active member. To be fair, Lloyd's Register wasn't in that game when I arrived. It had spent so much of its energy and time focusing on the digitization of the plan. That was all it did. And now we're going out there and being a player in the world. And there are very few funders out there in this space. And so we're very proud to be, one of the leading funders there. And we get, we're starting to really exert influence over the agenda globally, by making judicious grants, and also trying to get people to talk about the history of safety and how it relates to the past, present and future ocean economy, because safety and maritime history are totally intertwined. And the more we understand safety, the more we understand how people have navigated the oceans. Here's a map of our network. It's a slightly incomprehensible thing, but it tells you, basically gives you a quiet idea of how we think and how we reach out and how our world looks. There are a few fun things here. One of the main projects that we have is around citizen science, and the Museum of London Archaeology working on the Citizen project, which is the intertidal zone. So we've got thousands of people looking at cultural heritage on the tide that is revealed by the tide coming in and out, and trying to map where that intertidal cultural heritage is through a group of people who are engaged, archaeologists and people who are interested in archaeology up and down the country. I'll move on quickly now. So ocean citizenship is another concept that we're seeking to fund, and this is where the museums are. I'll make a comment about maritime museums. Maritime museums historically have been, we've all been to them, we were all dragged there by our uncles and aunts and parents, places where you've got pictures of naval battles, the odd bit of busts of men, valiant admirals. You had some if you were lucky, bits of the Titanic and ship models, that sort of thing. So it was all about the ships and about the Navy and Nelson and all of these things, and that's true all over the world. But then the whole sector now is evolving, because they realize that that's not the story that needs to be told anymore. So the story they want to tell now is about ocean citizenship, and about how have people lived with the oceans, and to try to use their museums and their collections to increase understanding of the oceans and the importance of the oceans to everybody's lives. And so the whole sector is in transition, is moving, and we are really excited about that, and we think that that plays into our hands. And so we're keen to work with, we work with something called the International Congress of Maritime Museums, which is 120 maritime museums around the world all coming together, and we fund that with a view, and in order to help these maritime museums transition into places where instead of telling the old story about naval battles, they tell this new story about how we must all learn to respect and live with the oceans in a more sustainable way. Having said that, one of our most exciting projects at the moment, which is getting a huge amount of global buy-in, is rewriting women into maritime history, where we've acknowledged that there are too few women represented in traditional maritime histories. And so we've got an exciting global coalition of people who are now rallying around, okay, so let's try and surface women's stories, tell women's stories and how they have influenced maritime history in all different geographies. And we're leading that and pioneering that, and convening that group, and that's a very exciting initiative. This is about our UN business, so you can see that, which is an exciting partnership, which I've already talked about. International Congress of Maritime Museums, I've talked about. Underwater cultural heritage and potentially polluting wrecks, I've talked about that as well. Marine protected areas, and yeah, the final thing I think I'll talk about the foundation, which is very which is a sort of our headline grabbing piece of work, is around aquaculture and how people are growing seaweed, and how we can help spread the world about using how do we grow things sustainably in the oceans, and harvest seaweed in a globally relevant way. And people have been doing this for years, so we will tell the history of aquaculture and how it relates to our own today's investment, which is to try to encourage the growth of a seaweed farming industry, to scale it up using technical standards across the world. And that's a big feature for the foundation, but it's also a big feature for us, because we want to tell the history of aquaculture that has existed outside the north and the global south for a very long time. It's a big part of what we do. The final stop on this tour is about the building itself. This is the Colcutt building, which is the historic home of Lloyd's Register. And it's going through a massive refurbishment at the moment, and in May 2024 will reopen. It'll have a big bespoke archive in the basement, where you'll be able to access our records. You'll be able to see this amazing, beautifully designed space that's going to be a convening place for people involved in the safety industry, in the maritime industry. People interested in maritime heritage will be able to come and use our library again. You see our state-of-the-art archive, explore it in person, and also to see the beautiful fabric of the Lloyd's building, which tells this amazing story of an organization that played such a big role in the maritime economy and developing the maritime economy. So I'm going to stop there. I think it's very difficult to do these talks online because you have no idea what people are thinking or whether they're asleep. But I'm going to stop there and take any questions.
Thank you, Alex, for an interesting lecture on something that we don't normally come across that much. We're more normally on the technical side of things. Does anyone have any questions at all? If you do, please use the raise hand option. Alternatively, if you do not want to feature on the recording of this lecture, you can ask your question in the Q&A chat. That's also an option. To start us off, I have a question. So you mentioned on the sort of the digitizing of the archives and things like that, that you were basically going to stop around the year 2000 because of commercial sensitivity. But is there a plan to sort of like, well, as every year goes on, can we go on to like year 2001, 2002, and 2003, or is it just going to stop at the year 2000?
Well, it's a really complicated question, because it's about technology. You know, well, currently all files are held digitally. There's very difficult to transfer digital files out of a business operating system into an archive system. It's the technology that kind of essentially, so how does that work is going to be a whole new challenge. It's not just us, lots of people are facing that. How do we the sheer volume of records that are now kept means that archives of the future are just going to be totally unwieldy and unmanageable, and you have to create complex policies about what you keep and what you don't keep from digital records. Your question was more about timing. Our policy is 30, everything comes out of commercial sensitivity after about 30 years. So as we move forward, you know, we hope to have a record that goes up to about 30 years before current business. I think that's quite conservative. I think over time that will get eroded to probably 20 years, but that may take a while before it gets that. So we're not yet up to date, but at the moment our parameter is we're allowed to digitize and record things, but we're not allowed to put things up online that are within 30 years of today.
Well, that maps quite well to the lifetime of a ship, to be fair.
Exactly. I think that's the kind of
but I suppose the ideal would be, though, that Lloyd's Register and the foundation would still be here in 100 years' time, and people would be looking back over what was being done, for example, in the decarbonisation hub and things like that, and looking at all those trends to then inform their next challenge, whatever it is that it might be.
No question. I mean, you know, you've got to keep these stories alive, and like, you know, so you can't predict how people are going to use these assets. All you have to do is make them available, you know, for whatever the world needs, and there's no sense in which those challenges are going away. And we hope that one of the great things about the world we live in terms of digital is that these archives, which used to be in discrete places, so you'd have to travel from A to B, C to D in order to see all this stuff. Now they're starting to connect. Now there are various standards that are starting about, you know, image into, you know, there's a company called, you know, imagery and things are being held in the same formats in different archives, so that these archives can talk to each other. So a single researcher based wherever you are can access all these different archives, you know, and the archives can talk to each other. You can do single searches across multiple archives. You'll soon be able to do single searches across multiple archives to discover information held in lots and lots of different geographies. And that's you know, that's going to be a big breakthrough. It's still relatively early days, but it's going to change the world of historical research.
Thank you. We have a question from Richard, who would like to know how the Lloyd's archives are tied in with the records at the National Maritime Museum.
Well, good question. The answer is they hold a lot of our records as well. They hold a lot of data that, you know, from Lloyd's Register, and we are trying to work out that relationship right now. We're about to put a big grant in. You know, we're a core funder of the National Maritime Museum. We fund to 2 curators there. We're about to put £1 million, a grant of £1 million over the next 5 years to keep that relationship going. And part of that is going to be merging or some sort of more digital data sharing process going forward. So the answer is it's not particularly joined up right now. We know each other incredibly well, and we're trying to work out ways in which we can do a better job.
Thank you. I don't seem to have any other questions at the moment. So take the opportunity to thank you once again for the lecture. Someone might pop a question in whilst we do this wrapping up bit, by the way, that frequently happens. But thank you for your time and for quite an interesting lecture. So this lecture will be available on YouTube in the next few days. Although I probably will ask you to send me a copy of that video, because the sound that came through, it was a little bit strange, and the video had interesting time skips on it. So I can insert the proper video into ours, and then it will display properly for everybody who wants to watch it on YouTube. Our next lecture is going to be on the 8th of March and is going to be on the role of the naval architect in marine salvage, which I'm sure will be very interesting. I'm hoping that that will be a hybrid lecture, but the speaker's yet to confirm that. And if it is a hybrid lecture, it'll be at Solent University. And there's just double checking. Yeah, we've got no more questions, so I think we'll wrap up now. So just come to 7:30, so bang on time. So thank you for that. And good night to everybody. Oh no, we got a question in, Richard again. Do all the profits of the Lloyd's commercial organisation get diverted into the foundation now?
I can't really answer that. I think that what happens is that, as with any commercial organisation, profits get redistributed. You have to be reinvested in growth and other, and that. So what happens is, whatever is left over after they reinvest in their growth plan, after in their own business, so the stuff that would be distributable, payable as tax, I think gets invested in the foundation. And then when they make big disposals, so they recently disposed of LRQA, and a lot of that money flows into the foundation, as so we had a boost from that as well. But I'm not really in charge of that decision. That's Mary's decision, and there's always some of it, but that's what will always some of it has to come to us, I think.
Okay, I think we really will wrap up there. And so, as I was saying, good night to everybody. And I hope that everyone can join us again for the next lecture.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Thank you. Night.